This video is going to show you how to write two-step equations. So if you take a look at the screen or at your note sheet, you'll notice that you have this box at the top and it shows you kind of like the general outline for a two-step equation where you are going to have some sort of number. So I'm just going to fill in a random number equals a number times the variable plus or minus depending on the situation. So adding or subtracting another number. So this is kind of what your two-step equation would look like. Would be 12 equals 2y plus 10. So if we take a look at example 1 says that Perry spent $30 on a magazine and some candy bars. If the magazine cost $6 and each candy bar cost $3, then how many candy bars did he buy? So the first thing we want to do is figure out what don't we know, because what we don't know is going to become our variable. So we want to figure out the variable first. So see how it says how many candy bars did he buy? That's our variable. That's what we don't know. Okay, so you want to identify a variable or a letter for our unknown. So I'm just going to use C. And again, C is going to represent the number of candy bars. Once I know that, now I can go back through and read the problem again. So I'm going to take a look at the fact that he spent $30 on a magazine and some candy bars. It says the magazine costs $6, so that goes back to this, and each candy bar costs $3. So we know he bought some candy bars, but I don't know how many candy bars he bought, hence why my variable is the number of candy bars. The next thing we want to think about is what is our total? Because whatever our total is, whatever our equation is equal to, is going to be by itself on one side of the equal sign. So if I look at this equation or this problem again, I see that he spent a total of $30. So that $30 is going to be by itself on one side of the equal sign. And now I need to think about, okay, well, if Perry spent $30, how did he spend that $30? Well, first of all, we know that he bought a magazine for $6. So if he bought a magazine for $6, that's going to be by itself because he only bought one magazine. Now we have to get to the sum candy bars, and that's where our two-piece part of our equation comes in. So if I think about this, I know that each candy bar costs $3. When I see that word each, it means multiplication. So you may want to make a note of that if you see the word each, it means multiplication. So each candy bar costs $3. So we could also rewrite that as $3 per candy bar. If you think back to our expressions unit, the word per also means multiplication. So again, if we see that word per or each, we're thinking multiplication. This is going to then become $3 times the amount of candy bars. Well, we don't know how many candy bars there are, so we're going to replace that with the letter C. Our final equation, when we simplify it down, is going to be 30 equals 3C plus 6. And this would be the equation for example 1. Example 2 says for a field trip, 20 students rode in cars. So again, that's important. And the rest filled 9 buses. How many students are in each bus if 236 students were on the trip? So again, we want to identify what we don't know. Well, what we don't know is the number of students on each bus. So we're going to write that down, number of students on each bus, and then we're going to assign a variable or a letter to that unknown. So I'm going to use the letter B for bus. Now I'm going to go back through and I'm going to look for my total, because remember the total is what is by itself on one side of the equal sign. So I see that my total is that 236 students. There were a total of 236 students that went on the trip. So now we need to figure out, well, how did they get to that total of 236 students? First, we see that 20 students rode in cars. It doesn't tell us multiple cars. It doesn't tell us anything about the students. So we know that that's going to end up being the number that's by itself, or that plus 20, because 20 students rode in cars. The rest filled 9 buses. So 9 buses of students on each bus, right? So there's 9 buses, and then we're seeing how many students are on each bus. So we're going to figure out the rest of the students by taking 9 times the number of students on each bus, because that's going to help us figure out how many total students rode the buses. So our final equation would then become 236 equals 9b plus 20. Example number 3 says that you had $24 to spend on 8 raffle tickets. So you had $24, 8 raffle tickets. After buying them, you had $8 left over. How much did each raffle ticket cost? So again, we want to identify the unknown, which would be the cost of each raffle ticket. So the cost of each raffle ticket is our unknown. We're going to come up with a variable or a letter to represent the unknown, and I'm going to use the letter C to represent the cost. Next step is to figure out the total. What is the total in this situation? How much did you have to start? Well, we had $24. So we know that we had $24 to spend on 8 raffle tickets. It says after buying them, you had $8. So this is our solo piece by itself. So that's going to become that plus 8. We spent money on 8 raffle tickets, but we don't know the cost of each raffle tickets. Okay? So in order to figure out how much we spent on those 8 raffle tickets, we have to take those 8 raffle tickets and multiply it by the cost of each raffle ticket. So we would do 8 times C. Our final equation would look like 24 equals 8C plus 8. Example 4, and this one's pretty straightforward. You'll see this one when we read through it. It says Dan rented a bike from Cody's Bikes. It cost $18 plus $2 per hour. If Dan paid $22, if Dan paid $22, then he rented the bike for how many hours? So again, we need to identify the variable. So we're trying to figure out the number of hours rented. So again, you want to think about, well, what word or what letter would represent a good variable? I'm going to use the letter N for number of hours. And now we're going to go back again and reread the problem and figure out the total. So what is the total that Dan paid? Dan paid a total of $22. How did he get to that, spending that $22? It tells us right here. It costs $18 plus $2 per hour. So again, we spent $18 upfront fee. This $2 per hour, we've talked about that word per before, and that means multiplication. So if it's $2 per hour, and we know that the number of hours rented is our variable of N, we're going to end up with 2 times N. Our final equation would look like 22 equals 2N plus 18. Final example says that Ryan won 123 pieces of gum playing horseshoes at the county fair. Later that week at school, he gave 4 to every student in his math class. He only has 3 remaining. How many students are in his class? So again, we want to be thinking about what don't we know. We don't know how many students are in his class. So that's going to be our variable. So I'm going to use the letter S for students, and that's going to represent how many students are in his class. Now we're going to reread, and we're going to figure out what was the total in this situation. Well, the total pertaining to the gum was 123 pieces. So Ryan had a total of 123 pieces. We currently know that he only has 3 pieces remaining. So we need to figure out how many pieces did he give away. Well, it says he gave 4 to every student. If we see again that word every, we are going to think multiplication, right? So we have 4 pieces per student. So if we think about 4 pieces per means multiplication, and we don't know how many students there are, we're going to have 4 times S. So that's going to get filled in our equation. Our final equation is going to look like 123 equals 4S plus 3. Hopefully these examples helped you understand how to write your two-step equations.